poets and writers, I'm Kay Spivey. I've gone back to purple hair. I missed it. I didn't want to go too long without purple hair, you know. Let's just let Cora be on camera for a sec. She just wants to be, she's a diva. She wants to be on camera. We'll just let her have some screen time for a second. Are you happy? She's purring up a storm. Can you hear her? She's so happy to be bothering me. She doesn't want anything to do with me when I'm in this room unless the camera's on. Just so you know, she sleeps until I turn on the camera and then she goes nuts. I don't know what it is. She's just a diva. But anyway, what I wanted to talk to you guys about today is that fun little thing called comparison. Now, I feel like this is the kind of thing that like writers can get really on edge about, and it's sort of like it can be a really touchy subject for like a really long time in your career, especially if like you're trying to explain your story to someone and they're like, oh, it sounds like Harry Potter. Like that can hurt. That can seem really dismissive. It can seem like someone's trying to kind of put down your work and say, oh, it's been done before, so like you don't need to do it. You're not going to do it as well. It can really kind of punch you in the gut, and this is the heart. Guts down here, punch you in the gut in that kind of way. But then you get into the publishing world and suddenly they're like, well, we need some comp titles. We need you to compare your work to something else. And it's like, oh, but you've been resisting that the entire time. And now all of a sudden they want comp titles. Now you have to compare your work to something else. And it can feel like you're having to force that, and it can feel really like it can have kind of an icky taste in your mouth. The problem is we kind of think about comparison in a really defensive way, and I've been noticing this more and more, especially like as I get into the K-pop world, as I'm expanding my horizons over there. I've noticed that especially younger fans are very, very devoted fans of certain groups. If you compare some aspect of their group, whether in a like they do this better or they do this worse, or they just both are doing a similar thing to two different K-pop groups, fans will get very defensive and very offended that you would dare to compare these two things. And I just started thinking about it in terms of writing as well, where especially new writers will get extremely defensive about being compared to something else. And the weird thing about it is, comparison is how we understand our world. Like, comparison is kind of the heart of poetry, you know? Like, comparison is what metaphor is. What metaphor is doing is comparing two things. By highlighting the similarities in the two things, we're able to see our world more clearly, more fully. You're able to understand a concept more clearly and more fully. Like if I say that the Hunger Games is like Battle Royale, they're not the same. They're actually quite different. But they have a similar thread, a similar aspect to them that helps you to understand that like the thing you may have liked or disliked about Battle Royale may be a similar thing that is happening in the Hunger Games, and that can help inform whether or not you're interested in that series. Especially when it comes to writing, having a comparison can just kind of bridge that gap into whether or not we feel like something is for us or not. Like we understand the world through comparison. For example, in my last video, my discussion with Alice, we talked about This Is How You Lose the Time War, and I compared it to Laini Taylor's Strange the Dreamer. I talked about the comparative writing styles. And no one left a comment about this, by the way. This isn't like putting somebody on blast. It's not in the sense of a negative thing to say that they are both employing purple prose, flowery language, using quite a bit of description, really playing up their vocabularies, those kinds of things. That they're both doing these things and it's executing in different manners. Helps you to understand the type of writing that we're talking about. Helps you to get a grasp on, if you've read both works, what things I felt like were working and what weren't in each book. What things were kind of working for me. And if you also were someone who were like, yeah, I really saw vivid images when I read Strange the Dreamer, saying that that's not the case, even though the writing style is similar, and many people, especially on Goodreads, will talk about the beautiful writing style, you may then get an idea of whether or not you'd be interested in reading a book like This Is How You Lose the Time War. Even though subject matter, the books are not similar in any way, being able to use one as a reference that others may also understand when talking about an aspect of another book is a valuable tool. It's a valuable tool across the board. If I say that, say Frankenstein is like the Phantom of the Opera, and you've only seen the Phantom of the Opera, it can then help me to explain in what ways you might or might not be interested in also reading Frankenstein, in what ways that character develops that might be similar to the Phantom of the Opera. And if you've read both things, you can then more fully understand connections between characters, and also you might just understand me better, that I'm making certain connections that you weren't making. That can be a valuable tool as well for helping to understand kind of how another person's mind works, that I'm seeing a thread that maybe you didn't see before, but maybe because now we're both aware of this thread, you're seeing it too, and we're both understanding and coming to a closer pinpoint on the graph of our overall understanding of the book. Like, comparison can be a very valuable thing. And most of the time when somebody is saying like, oh, your work sounds like Harry Potter, they're not necessarily saying, oh, that means it's not good, this means I don't want to read it, that means it's already been done. Most of the time they're saying, oh, a school with magic. I'm on the same page as you, I understand this. And becoming defensive about it doesn't help them then to help you to bridge the gap into what they're actually talking about. What it does is then close them off when they're like, oh, you mean it's not like that? Well, now I don't understand what you're talking about. Even though they're trying to get closer to you. The more often we compare things, the more we're just helping to bridge gaps. If apples are like oranges to you, like, why? They're both fruit. Well, now we've categorized them together in a place. Everything gets categorized together in a place somewhere, and helping to make those categories and line them up does help other people understand our worldview, does help us understand our worldview as a whole, understand the world we're living in. There isn't anything negative about comparison, and we shouldn't be afraid of it. Can it be done in a nefarious way, in a malicious way? Yeah, absolutely. Someone could absolutely be telling you, oh, I feel like your work's been done. I think this is very, very common when, especially female writers, and especially ones whose books might have an aspect of romance in some part, fit into the YA category, even though their book may not fit into that category at all, may have nothing to do with YA, may very much need to be in a different section. That is a prevalent issue. Women writers getting shoved into categories that they don't necessarily belong in because those sections are thought of as more women's territory can be a huge problem, and that is something that many people deal with. Women of color deal with it probably to a greater degree, to be honest, where the book isn't necessarily getting belittled by being put into YA, but is getting miscategorized and misrepresented in a way that then inhibits the proper readership from finding it, or people who find it in a YA category might be like, this is not an appropriate book to be here, this doesn't fit here, and then they may have a lesser view of the book because that's not what they were looking for. The comparison should help inform a person about the material, and if something that does not belong in a category is put there, that can be really, really detrimental. Like, we want things to better inform people, not worse inform people of what they are getting into with something. That's the whole purpose of comparison, and I think that problem is part of the reason why you'll see many, especially female, it's not only female writers, but it is especially, will get very defensive if their book is getting lumped into YA. Jenna Morassi is a really good example from the AuthorTube community that her books are not YA books. They don't fit into that category. They don't have that kind of subject matter. They have a subject matter that places them into the adult category. And she does get a bit defensive about people comparing them to YA, and yet people who read her books, a lot of them are YA readers, and a lot of them will see many aspects of them, many aspects of the character arc and the romance arc that are very similar to the types of romance arcs that would happen in the YA category, and might say, as I have definitely done, I have definitely compared her books to YA and said, if you enjoy books of this type in this genre, if you enjoy kind of more dystopian YA novels, but you want something edgier, you want something with more swearing, more violence, this would be a book for you. Comparing the thing that you know, the thing that has similar aspects, and saying, but if you were looking for something harder, this book does those things this way. Meant to be just a tool for other people to be like, ah, okay, that is what I want. I'm coming over here now to get this. But it can make someone really defensive. Like, no, her book does not belong in the YA category. To even bring it up could really hit a nerve. And I think that's an unfortunate thing, that so much bad judgment on the part of publishing has made people very sensitive to the placement of their books in categories, or to the comparison of their books to categories. Harry Potter has been a phenomenon that has, you know, risen and fallen in very dramatic ways, ways that are sort of, still to this day, I don't think we fully understand just the impact that it's had on culture. It's so massive that when someone compares anything to it, it's just like saying your book is like the Bible. Well, just because it's something everyone has read, many things are like the Bible. Many things are like Harry Potter. It doesn't actually tell us anything about it, and in that sense, it feels very belittling to the work that you're trying to put out. It feels like someone is trying to belittle your work because they're comparing it to something that just, it doesn't tell them anything. It doesn't further your understanding of the novel. In that way, that kind of thing is just, it's not a good comparison. But that doesn't mean that somebody who is saying this is kind of like Harry Potter means that in a malicious way. They could just simply mean this is a magical school book. I mean, it's the biggest magical school book series out there. So of course someone is going to mention that if your story also takes place in a magical school. Or if you have just similar aspects to your story, like someone may still compare you to something, and they may compare you to something you don't fundamentally agree with. Someone may at some point compare your story or your style or your plot or anything to something that you fundamentally disagree with, to an author you do not like, that you would not want to be put in the same category, something that to you would feel extremely offensive, that you don't want anyone to be making that comparison between you and this other author or book series or whatever. That can certainly happen, and I think as more and more readers read your work, will happen at some point. It's sort of inevitable. It does not mean that that person is doing it in a malicious way, and it doesn't also mean that the thing that you find reprehensible about the work or the person or anything is the thing that they are connecting. I think people should keep that in mind. Like, have an open mind. First of all, you shouldn't necessarily be looking up reviews of your own work, because you're going to end up being hurt at some point. Like, we all have feelings, and yeah, we all want to know because we're nosy as heck. If you're gonna be hurt anyway, like, maybe avoid. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with your work. It doesn't mean that there's something necessarily wrong with the person you despise's work either. The person who compares them may have a very legitimate reason for comparing them. They may be trying to explain to someone else out there in the world that may also have enjoyed the work that you dislike, that your work has something else, and that perhaps they'd like it even better than they liked the other work. Like, there's so many reasons to compare things, especially, like, let's say the person is like, ah, this reprehensible work. This person has written something that I feel is very similar in these ways, but isn't reprehensible. Huzzah! There is a good work in the world that represents these things that I wanted to read. It's out there. Everyone should go here if they were looking for this other thing. That's a great thing. More people coming to your work because they also don't want to experience the reprehensible thing. Like, there's a lot of reasons someone could compare two things. In poetry, that's what we do. In reviews, that's what you do. When you're trying to sell your book to an agent, that's what you do. Comparison is vital and necessary, and it helps inform us, and it helps us shape the world we live in. And I think it's really sad that people's knee-jerk reaction is to say no when two things are compared, especially two things that are very similar. We're two musical artists, let's say. They're already musical artists. That's a thread connecting them. If you're saying, I like this one, like, I like Taylor Swift, but I don't like Selena Gomez, well, they're both musical artists, similar age, coming up around the similar time. Easy comparison. Do they sound anything similar? Do they have similar songs, like similar audiences, similar looks, anything? No, but if I've never heard of Selena Gomez and you say she's kind of like Taylor Swift, well, that helps me to narrow down the category of where I might find her if I'm trying to look her up. In the charts. I don't know why I chose that. Those were the two biggest names that like popped into my head in the pop world, in the American pop world. Does it fully explain what either artist is doing or what one is doing in my own opinion better than the other? No, it doesn't explain anything, but it helps to narrow the focus, helps to categorize. And if I say I feel like they have these aspects similar, that can help to narrow it even more, help you to understand one artist through the other. It doesn't mean that I'm saying that they're the same. I don't think anyone ever compares two things to say that they are perfectly the same. I think, to be honest, all of us adults out here in the internet world at some level understand that if someone is saying something is like something else, if they're comparing two things, they're not saying that they're the same. And they're not starting off by saying, my fave is better than your fave. And I think perhaps it's fan culture has really got us on that train. I don't know where that comes from, but to immediately jump to assuming someone thinks their fave is better than your fave and they're somehow bringing down your fave is just toxic in general. My fave could be Laini Taylor's Strange the Dreamer. It kind of is. I loved that series. That doesn't mean that I think Amal El-Mohtar or Max Gladstone are bad writers by any means. I'm simply trying to find a thread that I understand to help explain more. Is that all coming across clear, or is that coming across rambly? Because I feel like it could be pretty rambly. I feel like this is just something that like vaguely bothers me, especially anytime anyone gets defensive about a comparison where it's just like, hey, I liked this, but I didn't like it as much as that, or I found this to be very similar to that, and someone's like, how can you say that? I always think probably that person is young. I do think that probably shows your age a little bit. Being defensive about that is the kind of thing that someone much younger is more apt to do, apt to defend their favorite, which there's nothing wrong with wanting to defend your favorite, but having that knee-jerk reaction I think is something you grow out of as you kind of get older and understand that the comparison isn't bad. The comparison is usually used as a tool. It's just a tool. If I say that I liked BTS's Map of the Soul album better than their Butter album, does that mean that Butter was bad? No. It just means I have a favorite. I mean, you can just have a favorite and not belittle something else, even though you're saying if I were to rank them, I'd rank this higher than that. Like, don't we do the tier rankings on the YouTubes all the time? And I think people can get upset about that too if their fave doesn't rise to the top of the list. But in general, everyone has preferences, and also everyone understands things by connecting them to other things, and comparison can be very necessary, very important, very helpful. And I hope we don't ever come to the point where, as a generalized internet world and society, we feel like we can't compare things, that everything must be a bubble by itself, because that's simply not how the world works. It's simply not how a person can understand the world. Things happen to be connected. Things happen to have had similar source materials, have had similar origins, have had similarities somewhere along the way, and there's nothing wrong with comparing them. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I'd love to know your thoughts on the issue. I think there have been bad players in the world of comparison, and people have gotten understandably sensitive, but I think that sensitivity is something that isn't necessarily helpful in continuing the conversation, in changing the way that we think about these kinds of things, in improving the environment of, like, say, publishing. I think it's more helpful to embrace comparison more fully and to say, yes, this thing is like this, but is it not more like this other thing? And maybe even lean into it heavier like that. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Let me know in the comments down below what you think as well. And I will talk to you again very soon. Good luck to you. Good luck to all of us. Bye.